Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. I see that Sean's here and a number of other people. We're just starting. We've got a lot of people coming from one session over into this session. Very excited about this double bill. We've got two sets of discussions now, looking at really the opportunities to be found in technology to resolve some of the sticky problems that we're facing. As we wait for people to come and join this session, leaving the others and coming into this one, I'll just introduce myself again. My name is Kesia Rust, and I'm the head of the Secretariat for the African Union for Housing Finance. And I'm sure you would have heard about this a lot by now, but the AUHF is an industry body representing banks and building societies, developers, financiers of all sorts, investors, all working to mobilize finance for housing across, and for affordable housing in particular, across the African continent. Every year we have a conference. This is our 36th conference, and normally it's in a real place. This year we are all in our own places and meeting on this virtual platform. I think we're all getting used to it by now, but it still is quite surprising. We had intended to be in Kigali, so that's where we hopefully will be next year. Every year we go to a different country and explore the housing finance systems in that place and think about ways in which we can learn from one another to really grow and develop housing and affordable access to affordable housing on the continent. We have two sessions back to back in this space here. The first one, resolving the land titling challenges with blockchain technology. And that's a program that we've been supporting, that CAF, the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa, has been supporting. And it's being driven by 71.4 and by CESO Global. And then after this discussion, we will carry on with the discussion on the future of blockchain technology and affordable housing across Africa. And we'll move from a South African focus to an African focus. I wonder if the panelists that are supposed to be in this session now are here yet, and if they can be let on stage. I can see that Sean's here. Others, if they can be let on stage, I'm looking for Daniel Bloch and Ilana Melzer and Michael Graglia. I'm not sure if he's able to join us, but if you are there, please do come and join. Hi, Daniel, you're there too. Great. And there's Ilana. Hello. So there's a button on the top right, I think, of your screen. If you click on that, that's like walking up to the stage. And you need to share your audio and your video, and then you'll come and join me up here. There's Ilana. Hello. Just waiting for it to start. And Daniel, are you managing to click on the button and come on in? And Sean's waiting to be let in. So the admin is saying to please reshare your audio and video. We've had this problem before. It is sometimes a little confusing, but we'll make it work. There we go. Hello, Daniel.
Hi, Kesia. Hi, Lana.
Nice to see you. Great. And we're just waiting for Sean. So I'm going to ask you both all three of you, to introduce yourselves. And then the way the session is going to work is, Ilana, you're going to take us through a presentation. And then we'll have a conversation afterwards. But it's really in your hands. I'm here if you need me. But basically, it's in your hands. Very excited to be able to share this work. There's Sean. Hello. Hi, Sean. Very nice that you're joining us. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got now 52 minutes to have this discussion. I think we'll open it very nicely with Ilana's presentation. And then following this panel, there's the discussion with colleagues from Tanzania and from Nigeria to talk about the application of blockchain technology then in other countries beyond the South African case that we're focusing on in this particular session. Okay, Ilana, can you well, in fact, let's do this first. Let's introduce one another. Ilana, introduce yourself first, and then Daniel and Sean after that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, great. My name's Ilana. I'm from a company called 71.4. Been working with Kesia and Kath for many, many years in the affordable housing sector in South Africa and across the continent, and very grateful for this opportunity to be at the conference, Kesia, and for the opportunities to work with you in the past.
Excellent. Thank you. Daniel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Block. I'm the CEO of Sesso Global. Sesso is a technology company. We're a UK-based company. We've been working in Nigeria for the past 3 years. We build PropTech-based land and property registries and then marketplace solutions. We'll talk more about it.
Excellent. Sean. Sean, we're struggling to hear you, or I am. No, we can't hear you. No, we can't. We could hear you better when you had, it was just faint a minute ago, but now nothing. Not anymore. Let's go on to the presentation, and then Sean, can you maybe introduce yourself afterwards? Is that okay? Great, thanks so much. Ilana, do you know how to share your screen?
I do.
Good.
Can you see my screen?
No, not yet. There we go. It's coming. It's coming. Yes, excellent. And can you make it full screen, because it's quite small for us?
How's that?
Excellent.
Great. So Kesia, I've got 25 minutes. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll monitor time, but if I do go over, please don't hesitate in giving me a warning. So just to say that this is just a summary of some of the work that we've been doing in South Africa on a blockchain pilot through the Transaction Support Center. And the support center, I'm not sure if everyone in the virtual room knows about the Transaction Support Center. So I thought I'd just do a very, very brief overview and then jump into the specific use cases that we're looking at in the Transaction Support Center. Basically, we're a walk-in office located in an area called Makaza, which is in Khayelitsha, a very big township in Cape Town. And we provide assistance to clients who come to us with various problems. I've got a slide of the caseload. This is most recent data, so we're at over 460 cases. You can see that the majority of issues that people are coming through into the support center with relate to title deed problems. So actually, we shouldn't have called ourselves the Transaction Support Center. We should have called ourselves the Tenure Support Center, because that's really what we deal with. So you can see of the 461 cases, over 300 relate to title deed problems. And the kinds of title deed problems we're seeing in the Transaction Support Center, there are a lot of informal sales that have taken place in the past. Those would have been sales where people would have paid cash directly to a seller on the back of perhaps an affidavit signed at a street committee, perhaps just a handshake. Those transactions and the purchases are obviously very, very much at risk of the registered owner coming forward to take possession of the property. And that is what's starting to happen in the area, because property prices have increased significantly. Sort of heirs of deceased sellers are coming forward to say, actually, my grandmother didn't sell you the house. So a lot of regularization of informal sales, and actually we're quite successful at that. A lot of deceased estate cases, so people dying, that's quite a difficult process for people to navigate on their own. So a lot of those issues. You can see what we call primary transfer cases. Those are cases where people have never received their title deeds from the government for their subsidy properties. So for people who are not familiar with South Africa, the housing subsidy program is a very extensive program. There have been over 3 million houses built by government and handed over to beneficiaries. But at the same time, we have an enormous backlog on the title deeds of those properties. So over 1 million of them have never been transferred from government to the beneficiary. And so we have a couple of those cases walking through the door. Just to notice, the cases themselves, the ones that we manage to resolve, they take a long time to resolve. It's a very, very time-consuming, very expensive process. And then just to notice how many we've put on hold for various reasons, and I'll talk to that later on in the presentation. So that's just a very, very brief summary of the Transaction Support Centre. And that's our walk-in caseload. So we just there, people come in, and we assist them with their problems. We've also done a pilot on a primary transfer issue using blockchain-based technology, and that was funded by the MasterCard Foundation. As I mentioned, there's a very, very significant backlog of subsidy properties that have never been transferred to beneficiaries. And in the neighborhood of the TSC, there are many, many properties like that. Obviously important for us to consider, why does this matter? I mean, the government building houses for people, the KPI, the key performance indicator for government, was the number of properties that were actually built because people need shelter. But beyond that, obviously we know that the title deed gives citizens security of tenure. It enables a leverageable asset to be used to create real wealth, and so it's critical. The title deed for the citizen is absolutely critical, and that's a common, you'll often hear the description of tenure and tenure-related issues positioned very much from the perspective of the benefits to the citizen. Of course, there are enormous benefits to the city as well, and this is what we're very, very aware of working in Khayelitsha. So the city provides services to households, and those services obviously come at a cost. The city can't recoup any revenue on those services because they don't know who the citizen is without the title deed. So the city relies on the property registration process to provide verified information on who owns a property, and through that on who what the city would call the business partner is, so who the partner is that the city should build. Likewise, for any governance related issues, if you want to submit plans for approval to the city, if you want to add on a room to your property, or you want to go up a story or add on some backyard flats, you would have to go to the city and show them that you are the registered owner of the property when you submit those plans. I mentioned the revenue issue as a critical driver for the city. And so for us, we're seeing the title deed as something that obviously secures the rights of the citizen, but also enables the city to have some administrative visibility over who lives in what properties and how, and then enables how they engage with those property owners. At the bottom of the circle, I've also got bankability, because we know the financial sector also needs to participate in this process. If we want the leverageable asset actually to be leveraged, we need the financial sector to step in with the mortgage, and so the title deeds provide that visibility and that security to the banking system to allow bankability. So very important to remember this, because I'm going to refer to this framework as we go through the presentation. Okay, so down to our pilot. For those of you who were in the session last year, you will remember, I hope, that we presented on the start of the pilot. We were just getting going, and the focus there was on just looking at these 4 pilot sites. I don't know if you can see my cursor, I hope you can, but our office is located here, where you can see Makaza Stadium. That's where we are. So we're kind of very central, at most 1.8 kilometers away from the furthest property in the study sites. So there are 4 housing developments that took place between 2011 and 2014, where houses were built, and you can see pictures of the roofs of those houses. These are very beautifully built houses, all of them with tiled roofs, so very high spec for government subsidy properties. And you can see Makaza West, the one area, 246 properties, Makaza East, 269, Makaza Zone 14, another project site, 299 properties, and then Makaza Central, 265 properties. And our project focused on exploring how we could use technology to enable the process of transfer from the city, these are all properties that are currently in the name of the city, to the beneficiary household or the person living in the property at the moment. Okay, so really the first step was around recording the validated claims to a property at a point in time. We had to populate this register, populate some kind of ownership record that we would put on a blockchain-based system. And that's quite an intensive process in and of itself. So as a first step, you have to visit each property. Remember, I mentioned that the properties were built between 2011 and 2014. We were in field in 2019. So over 5 years had elapsed between the time there was an occupant allocated to a property and the time we were actually doing a survey on who was currently living in the property. So that's the first step. Just knock on the door and say, hey, we just want to find out who owns this property, who lives in this property, how did you come to own it if you're not a beneficiary. A validation against existing administrative data. Also asking households to provide any evidence if there had been a purchase or if someone was deceased. Could they just validate that information for us? And of course, in some cases, we experience some issues with people having multiple claims, multiple people having claims to the same property. And that leads you to a process of saying, okay, we've got some disputes, we need mechanisms to resolve those disputes. So you assess the claim and then take it through to some adjudicating entity. In this case, it would be the city, just because the city currently owns those properties. And then once we've validated all the information, only then can we add the property to the register. And so what we've got is an immutable record. If we use a blockchain system, we've got an immutable record of a claim to a property with all the supporting evidence at a point in time. We know that if we loaded that property up, let's say on the 2nd of February 2020, and we added in all the supporting documents and we created digital versions of them, we know for certain that that property was added to the register at that date, and there's no way that that record can be tampered with. So that's critical. It's at a point in time, at time zero, T0. Okay, so in our work, a couple of lessons that really resonate. I mean, we've seen a lot of claims about the blockchain being the trust machine, and of course, for the participants in the system, it can obviously play that role because to some extent, depending on the nature of the solution, we'll talk about the solution that we're using, but in a permissionless system, it can create trust between parties without a centralized authority. In our case, that didn't really help. Going around to the neighborhood and saying to people, we're going to build a blockchain-based system to record who lives in what properties didn't create any trust. So if we're looking at just what actually happened to us in field, so if we see an area like Makaza West, that was where we had the lowest levels of trust. You could see 75% of the households in that area participated. In other words, 25% didn't. So in many cases, that was a trust deficit. People didn't trust us. The area leaders were very suspicious of this process. They possibly feel a little bit threatened. At the moment, they have some authority in the community because they are the only people who have the phone number of the city officials, who have the authority to transfer the property. So as soon as you intermediate and you come between the area leaders and the city, that creates distrust. And so in this particular area, the leaders were not terribly much in favor of us doing this work. But you can see in other areas, we've got relatively high participation rates. And our sense was that was because we had been operating the TSC for over a year at the time, and we were there. There was an office. They could come past. They could see that we were physically present in the neighborhood. The second lesson around what blockchain technology doesn't do, and this is a quote from a fantastic document, really worthwhile read, Blockchain and Property in 2018, at the end of the beginning, by Michael Graglia and Christopher Mellon. Really can't recommend the document more highly. But just the point to make here and highlighted in bold, most importantly, it won't resolve the tedious and time-consuming process of collecting, verifying, and bringing data into the system in the first place. And that was certainly our experience, that you've got a system, but you've got to go door to door. You've got to get the data. You've got to validate. You've got to create the trust in the local community that you actually are trustworthy and capable of doing this work. In our case, of the 930 properties we surveyed, in 274 cases, we couldn't validate the claims. And that's for a range of reasons. So in some cases, the registered beneficiary, we would validate the claim of beneficiary data in city and national administration systems. In some cases, the occupant had purchased the property from that beneficiary. We have to go and validate that that purchase took place. We don't have any evidence of it. There might be an affidavit, but we can't necessarily trust that the affidavit is authentic. So we would have to trace the beneficiary, validate the transaction had actually taken place. Likewise, if the occupant told us that they'd inherited the property, we would have to validate that someone actually was deceased. So there's a lot of investigation and hard work, and it's case by case that you have to do this work. So that is really, really critical when it comes to property. This is the biggest asset that people own. You have to pay attention to each and every property. The third lesson about what it doesn't do is overcome inertia. We've seen this in our work in a particular subset of those properties where we're actually signing sale agreements. So we are signing sale agreements in Makaza East, West, and Central, not in the bottom sort of project zone 14. But in these three projects, we're actually facilitating the process end to end, taking it all the way through, hopefully, to the deeds registry. And what I just want to highlight here is we have, of the 664 survey properties in those three areas, we have validated 484 properties. We've been calling people to sign sale agreements since the 7th of December last year. That was our first signing. And we contact people, we're in the area, and you can see that so far 306 people have signed, or 306 households have signed. We're still awaiting a signature on 178. And in many cases, people are in the neighborhood. They are right there. We're phoning them, we're SMSing them to say, please come in and sign, and they're not doing that. So there's real inertia, partly possibly because people don't believe that this is going to materialize in any kind of title deed. Possibly it just, there's no rush, this process takes so long anyway, I'm not planning on going anywhere. But at this stage, what we're about to do is literally get in a car with the sale agreements, with a scanning device, which is actually conveniently in a cell phone, and go door to door to sign sale agreements once we can verify people's identity. So the inertia is significant and really does make the process quite a lengthy process. But let's talk about what technology can do and what blockchain technology can do. In the first instance, it can help us get rid of spreadsheets. And this has been a thorn in the side of the project, these spreadsheets. Let me just give you an example. What we're working with, if we look at all the entities that are involved in the process, so we are working on the project team. We have a beneficiary family who we're engaging with. There's provincial authorities, there's the city, there's the conveyancer. So there are 5 entities that are providing data or providing some input into this process. And if we just start with looking at what are these spreadsheets, when we've got a spreadsheet from the project manager, which is the list of all the people that the project manager says were moved into the properties when they were built, they were shared with the project team. At the same time, we've got provincial authorities who've accessed data from the housing subsidy system on the status of those subsidy beneficiaries. Were they actually approved for a subsidy? So that's critical. You've got to overlay that against the city spreadsheet to see whether or not we can actually validate the data coming out of the occupancy survey, which we've got on a spreadsheet. And we use all of that to create another spreadsheet, which validates all the claims that the beneficiary might have to the property relative to the city data and relative to the provincial data. And we can then see who can sign sale agreements. We share that with the city together with a list on another spreadsheet of all the exceptions broken down by the type of exception they are, because they're different next steps with each exception case. We can share something with the conveyancer who can start to sign sale agreements, and they keep a record on a spreadsheet of all the sale agreements that they're signing. For them to register in the deeds office, they need property prices, which comes from another spreadsheet from the city, which is generated off a spreadsheet from the provincial authority on the housing subsidy system. And then there's yet another spreadsheet that has to be prepared for submission into the city's rates clearance, bulk rates clearance certificate process. So needless to say, it is a total mess, and we don't know what's going on. No one is a central authority who can actually at a point in time pinpoint where any particular sale agreement is in the process, or where any subsidy beneficiary is. When we update a spreadsheet, no one knows about it. Likewise, when the conveyancer updates a spreadsheet, no one knows about it. So version control is a major, major problem. Obviously, there are many solutions to this. I mean, Google Sheets is one solution. It's not terribly secure, but it's a good solution. But distributed ledger technology really does this very, very well. So you can have authenticated users coming into a system, transacting in a way that they're allowed to transact, and updating the records according to specified protocols with the right kind of data and authentication. So that's fantastic. The other solution that it enables is it allows people to get on with their life. So what happens in the normal course of events in the housing subsidy process? We have a beneficiary who's identified. We build the house. We put the beneficiary in the house, and that's all recorded on the housing subsidy system, which I've mentioned. That's an administration system which is very clunky, and the less we say about that system, the less trouble we're going to get into. So that's what it is, a very, very big system which is supposed to record accurate information on beneficiaries and properties, but which doesn't do a terribly good job of that. Then we've got the process. Once the beneficiary is in the house, we want to hand over, register the property and hand over the title deed. I mean, you obviously need to know who's in the house to do that. And that's at some point in the future. And the reason that's at some point in the future is because in our rush to build houses, we want to get people into houses as quickly as possible. We might have missed some of the steps that take us from raw land into land that's registered in a general plan and that can actually be associated with a title deed. So we might have skipped some of those steps, and now we have to go back and fix those errors and get all the right certificates that we need from the city, establish the township, the register, and then start to register the properties. That can take many, many years. And so from the time that the person or the family has moved into the property until the time that you're ready to get a title deed, life happens. So that's all on the property registration system. But in between this time, you know, lots of things happen. People get married, people move away, some people even die, even though that's very inconvenient. People get divorced. And so people will sell their properties or rent them out. We know in South Africa, those of us familiar with the subsidy system know that we're actually not allowed to sell properties if you're a beneficiary for 8 years. But of course, you haven't got the title deed, so you don't know that there's a restrictive clause on the title deed. And so if you sell your house, this whole sort of policy requirement that you're not allowed to sell is just completely irrelevant. So many people will have sold. A lot of people will put tenants in their properties, even though officials also hate that. But then when we come to do an occupancy survey and someone says they own the property, well, we're never sure that they might not be a tenant who's just claiming to own the property. Again, these are houses worth on the market, on the open market, without a title deed at the moment, 250,000 Rand. That's what they're selling for. So there's a real incentive for people sometimes to be a little bit frugal with the truth. We definitely want to validate that. And as I mentioned, because of the elapsed time between the beneficiary moving into the property and the property registration process actually being able to continue, many, many things can happen. Well, our system can sort of help with that. So on the one side, we've got the housing subsidy system, which I mentioned, a very big clunky system. Likewise, on the other side, the big administration system we've got there is the deeds office, also not a very flexible system, but we can be quite flexible in the middle. And that's what we've built with CESO, is a platform that can enable people to transact. Once we have validated their claim to a property and once they're loaded onto our register, they can now transact. So we have a process to enable people to keep those records up to date through our system. For every transaction that they want to undertake, we have the supporting documents that are required, the official documents that need to be signed, so that when we are ready to register those properties, we have secure, confirmed data, and we can do this relatively quickly. So that's lesson number 6. What it can do is enable administrative visibility and bankability, which is the two things we described at the beginning of the presentation that are really, really critical. So we've got something in the middle there. It's not quite a title deed, but it's something pretty close, and in some ways, actually, because of our system, a little bit better, we would say. So we've got, we've kind of, we think, met the burden in terms of using this pilot to show that we can create an administratively visible, bankable record that now can be shared with the city. So that's our next step. At the end of this pilot, this is where we got to. Okay, moving on to the next use case, and that's the case management system for the TSC. So we've built something that works very well with primary registration, so to handle the title deed backlog. We've got a good system that we think, scale up. But now just looking at the day-to-day operations of the TSC itself, we're kind of running off Google Sheets, very, very basic systems. It's a very paper-based system. We're scanning everything, but it's not a robust case management system. And as our caseload is growing, we need something a little bit more secure. And so that's what we're building at the moment with the support of Oppenheimer Generations, who's funding this part of the work. And we're doing this again with CESO Global, and Daniel, I hope, will add many, many comments on the technical side that I can't speak to. But just to go back to the slide that I've shared at the beginning of the presentation, just to mention, I mentioned earlier how long it actually takes for us to get resolution of cases. Very, very time-consuming process. And the reason it takes a long time is because we need multiple inputs, and those inputs can only be obtained by the person who is transacting themselves. You can see we've got many, many cases that are closed or pended. And those are closed or pended in many cases because clients just don't come back to us with the documents that they need. So if we look at something like winding up a deceased estate, well, that is a very, very complicated process. You need multiple documents from multiple departments. You've got to go from pillar to post. If you've got, for instance, there are arrears on the account, well, you've got to go to stocks and stocks, a building that's where the city operates from, to get some kind of negotiation on a rates payment plan so that you can get a rates clearance certificate. You need to get all the certificates from Home Affairs. Some of the challenges there, for instance, if there was a customary marriage that wasn't registered, well, the Department of Justice says that you need a document from Home Affairs. Home Affairs has never heard of this document. Likewise, to validate the claims in terms of who is actually registered. Is there a title deed? Do we need to apply for a VA copy of the title deed because the title deed is lost? We've got to go to the deeds office in the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform. So it's a very, very, very tedious and time-consuming process to work within the current formal system, and clients will often fatigue. Our vision with a case management system with a TSC is to create a one-stop shop, a very efficient, secure, affordable title shop. People don't need to go to Home Affairs. They don't need to go to the master's office. They don't need to go to the city or conveyancers. We've got access to all the data to enable us to resolve the cases and to validate any kind of claims. And then we've got secure processes that coordinate seamlessly and sequentially across the multiple parties whose cooperation is required to enable a transaction. And of course, we've got full visibility of the process. And this is where smart contracts come in. And I'm hoping Daniel will talk to this because I have no idea what the technology actually is involved here. But what I do know is that you've got a system where you can see the steps. Every party to the transaction knows exactly what needs to happen. That's coded. That code is also secured on the blockchain. It cannot be tampered with. And so you can have an update on the ledger in a way that is authenticated and validated seamlessly. Of course, when it comes to a property-based register, we're not talking about a permissionless public blockchain. This will be a permissioned blockchain, and we will have validating entities, and in some cases that would be government. So it's not a permissionless system at all. But basically, the systems that we're looking at would be to integrate all these various departments. The province, the city, national, the revenue authority, banks, and of course we don't want to leave the conveyancers up. So the conveyancers at the moment play that critical role of validating identities. We'll be hoping that as we get more and more involved in e-government, we can validate identities of our smart ID cards in South Africa, which are well enabled to do this. But basically, we would have multiple entities participating in a blockchain-based platform that can enable this efficiency, affordability, and security. And this is where the trust machine comes in. That as long as these parties, the parties that are actually participating in the transaction themselves, as long as they trust the system, we can do this. So that, I think, is really, really an interesting element to think about. How do we get the various entities in the state to trust a system? Is it the case that they would have to build the system themselves to trust it? And we would argue that when it comes to a blockchain-based solution, because the code is visible, because everyone can see the steps, and because everyone knows that those steps can't be tampered with, we would hope that government would trust a system that they don't necessarily have to build themselves. Of course, that's the government entities and the banks and all those other entities that are involved in the transaction, but we mustn't forget the property owner themselves. And I mentioned many of the barriers to adoption in the pilot on the primary transfers, and issues around inertia, issues around trust. And it's useful to look at some of the literature on driving behavioral change coming out of various governments. This is coming out of the UK, but basically you need a system that's easy, attractive, social, and timely. I'm not going to go into this, but happy to talk about it if there are questions. We focus on the technology, and I think the critical point is that if we want people to use this, it's not just the technology. It's fundamentally about getting people to use this. That means our processes have to be good, they have to be accessible, they have to be understandable. And of course, our policy has to support formalization. At the moment, we would argue that we have a policy that actually would discourage people from wanting to formalize, and happy to talk to that in the discussion as well. But having things like a restriction on sale in your title deed does nothing really to support formal processes, because when people do need to sell, there are better ways for them to do it. So I think the policy issue is a big one, but we know the wheels of policy turn very, very slowly. So if we just sum up what we think we can do with blockchain technology in the case management system in the TSC is to create administrative visibility and bankability. Fantastic. And maybe it's not going to be with a title deed. We have a lot of cases that can't be resolved because there are various challenges, and maybe we won't get a title deed. But can we get good enough evidence, and can we share that with the city? And would a lender be willing to provide some kind of finance on the back of that evidence? That time will tell, but certainly passing the information back to the city system to enable them to recognize a validated, verified participant who they themselves, as a validating entity in the system, have validated. We think that is a doable objective, and that's something we would be wanting to do in the case management system. The last use case that I want to talk to is an informal settlements pilot, and this is funded with a grant through something called Urban Links Africa, which is a UK-based initiative. Yes.
Time.
Okay, all right. Let me finish with one more minute. Here, what we think we can do is really create administrative visibility. We're not sure about bankability. We're not sure about leverageable assets and household wealth yet. We're in an informal settlement. We don't know whether there's going to be upgrading. We're not going to be able to get to title deeds for a very long time, but we'll have something. And I just want to talk about this in the context of a particular case that's come to us. Welcome to Never Never. Never Never is an informal settlement in Philippi. That's a picture of the settlement. It's about 600 properties or so that we've eyeballed. And just yesterday, we had a request from someone who's saying that they want to buy a shack in Never Never. And this is a letter from the committee chairperson in that informal settlement to say, this is what you need. We need copies of IDs. We need witnesses. The committee will witness. And then you need to pay for the property. And then once you've paid, we'll transfer the shack to you. So there's an established process in this informal settlement and about how to transfer properties. And we've seen examples of other community-based organizations providing sort of certificates of occupancy or ownership for people living in informal settlements. What there isn't, though, is a mechanism to feed that back into the city. And I think that's what we're trying to do with this pilot, is to create what we've called a shadow property value chain. And this is a picture of the formal property value chain that exists in the city of Cape Town, and you can see it's directed towards revenue. That's where we want to end up, with the right bill going to the right person for the right amount. And you can see a whole lot of information that supports that, all the zoning, all the building control, the valuation, the land use, GIS data, all of that supporting this objective of the revenue value stream in the property value chain. And you can see it's a very nice, expensive SAP system that they've put in there. We would want to create a shadow system. And just to speak to this issue again of how would we do that with the city, and does the city need to do it? And I think just another cover from The Economist, we know this is an era of austerity that we're going into. We don't think that government is going to have, and city will have a lot of funding available to build new systems. And so our offer really is for us to build the system with the active participation of the city, so the city actually guides this but doesn't build it, validates all the transactions, has full visibility of what's going on, brings that information into its administrative processes. So I'm going to leave it there, and I apologize for going over time.
That was great, Ilana. Thank you so much. Maybe if you can turn off your screen sharing, and then we can see all of you in larger life. And really, this is your conversation. You're still, yeah, there we go. Perfect. So I'll just hand over to you, but maybe Daniel, you want to start because you've been such a key partner in this whole process, and it's been really great working with you on this. Yeah, please go ahead.
Fantastic presentation. Thanks, Ilana. And I saw some of the questions and really great questions. And I think one aspect in where blockchain can come in, I think Ilana spoke that blockchain is not like the end-all solution. Blockchain stores data securely, but does not verify that data. So if you put bad data on the platform, you're going to have, not a very useful platform. But I think what we're really trying to accomplish and where the blockchain is going to be, really essential, we've already seen the benefits, is that we always say registering the title is really the end of the process, not the beginning. So there's generally a thought where, kind of like maybe in old Western movies where you have just a title deed and that's just passed around between people. But I think, we're quite far, from that. As Ilana spoke, that, most governments have the mindset that this is, it's a set thing. If people don't register, they're not going to register. But as Ilana said, the world moves on. Even in these informal settlements, people find ways to register. So when we look at when you're registering a title, you're generally bringing a large scale, amount of documentation that is from the private sector, maybe, conveyancing documents, maybe checks from the arrears, we talk about the taxes, maybe the building plans, if it's a building. So there's so much private sector documentation that goes into a title deed registration. And if these have had informal transactions, you might have multiple transactions worth of documentations. So I would just note that is that, the system is not meant to replace the government. It's meant to bring in this necessary backlog onto a trustable system that can then integrate with the government. And I think, we've seen a lot of interest in people joining onto the platform and submitting their documentation, because if you go to the government and you don't have the right documentation, the government generally is not going to say, oh, let me help you and track down all these people and get your paperwork to what it needs to be. The government's an administrator. They're not there to go through and find this kind of lost transaction. So that's where it comes in. And there's, this aspect, there's NGOs doing, surveying work all over, Africa, all over South Africa. And what we need to do is start bringing this data, occupancy data, the private sector data, onto a platform that can be queried. And what I think Ilana says great is give the government an administrative view, empower the government to make the process easier with the data that's provided.
Sean, do you want to come in now? And what are your thoughts and reflections?
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Great. Thank you, Ilana. Fantastic presentation. And Daniel, there's a few points you mentioned there in terms of, it's not replacing the government, but that whole gathering of the relative documents and information for a transaction, that's commonly part of, and globally is quite a manual process. And then where you have, deed registries and departments that are a bit inefficient, it's probably harder and sometimes impossible to get the documents. So if you have digital documents and a way to store them on a platform and share them with the parties involved in a transaction, it can really help efficiencies in terms of transactions and make things easier for the seller and the buyer. So I think that's quite interesting because it does go, we spoke about digital contracts, etc. So that's quite interesting. And then on the data side, because my background is a market analyst and a research analyst, so more data is good for markets in terms of efficiency and transparency for investors, developers, and NGOs and governments, etc. For policy making, for feasibility studies, etc. And then also for PropTech, data is the sort of the lifeblood of any. So if you had these platforms, I'm quite excited about land information systems, etc. Exactly what these projects are doing in terms of a foundation for new PropTechs to come out of and leverage off this data. So that's quite exciting as well from my side.
Maybe so I want to touch on one of the questions that someone asked is there anywhere that this has happened and people have done this? And so I would say not in the blockchain space, but if you look at a digital registry, there are multiple private sector examples. So even South Africa, looking in the context of where we're working, has an almost digital registry. Windeed, when you do Windeed, that is not connected to the deed registry. That is a private company, Lexis Convey. If you do conveyancing transactions into the registry, that is also a private company, Ghost Convey. And if we look at especially any Anglophone country, every Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, all countries have conveyancing laws. An average citizen is not meant to go to the land registry. There's meant to be a conveyancer buffer, in between that. So if you look at South Africa, where 90% of the registry, we're really coming into the part that's left behind, is on a digital system, but is not related to the government. So I just would say that, most laws, especially Anglophone laws, if you look at the French-based system, you're looking at notaries that you need to work with before the land registry. So I think this sets up a very big opportunity of following the process of the law towards digitization registry. So we'd say, should we start with the government or should we start with the conveyancers? I don't know if Alana or Sean, anyone want to maybe touch on that?
Yeah, no, I think for us, it's always about starting with the property owner. And that I think is really interesting. And I think in the way we've engaged with the city, we are not a service provider to the city. So the blockchain pilot, even though we had access to city data, we were not a service provider to the city. We went door to door, and if people didn't want to participate, they didn't have to participate, as I mentioned. And so we get our sort of mandate, often is questioned by city officials. We get that mandate from the property owner. And I think that does set up a very different dynamic. And I think, again, this relationship between the citizen and the state and how a blockchain-based solution changes that a little bit. So you're no longer just a beneficiary or you're at the mercy of officials who want to, process or not your title deed. You're actually an active participant, and the state will catch up. Get on with your life. Get on with your life. These standard processes that you can adopt, they're accessible, they're completely secure. You can move on. And then we've got a system that the state can catch up, and the state is ready to catch up. It's all there, back to back, as Daniel said. Someone's died, someone's sold, it's the same property, but we've got all the records. And so for a conveyancer to get that into the formal system is entirely doable. I think looking to the future, we don't know what the future is going to hold in terms of property registration. In Africa, there is an electronic deeds registry sort of initiative that's underway. One doesn't want to hold one's breath, and I wouldn't recommend for anyone to be holding their breath on that one. But I think this process actually facilitates that. I think that we're very afraid of doing things, and I think it's not just South Africa. I think, you don't want to mess with the deeds here. You don't want to mess with the deeds office. It's a system, okay, it's clunky. I mean, it's, when you go on a tour of the deeds office, you go into the vault and you see all the paper documents, and then there was a fine, and it's a disaster. It's not their system, but it's a system, and it works, and it protects the property rights of certainly the wealthier property owners in the city. So you don't want to mess with that. But there's a lot that we can do outside it. And then through doing that, we establish a process that we can identify little bit by little bit, how can we improve things? So it's much more incremental. We don't come in with a whole new system that doesn't work and everyone's very upset. Much more incremental process, much more driven from households up, so that we don't have the problem with people not adopting these top-down systems that we've imposed on them. It's hard to be optimistic about anything these days, but I think we're optimistic about this.
Ilana, you do make it sound quite rosy. There was a good question though from Roland Ivanova from Nigeria, asking, what about dispute resolution? What if people don't?
I mean, this is just a major problem. We don't, the dispute resolution system at the moment in South Africa will rely on the courts. So the courts are very expensive and very, very takes a long time. So we're looking at a matter now in the Pretoria High Court. Our court date is for May next year. it's not a terribly responsive system. It's very expensive. It's not accessible, yeah. So the courts are not the way to go. We don't think. What we try and do in the TSC is mediate. So often, so for instance, there's a whole section of properties, about 1,200 properties around us, where the transfer actually took place to a beneficiary that never ever lived in the property, and the properties have been lived in by other people now for 28, 27 years in some cases. So there are different people living in the properties. The registered owners often don't even know that they've got this property. It's a bizarre situation, but this is what happens. Now to kind of resolve that is going to be very difficult. Let's say the registered property owner arrives and says, I want you out my house. Let's say that registered property owner goes to the court and gets the eviction order and arrives with the red ants, who are our sort of colleagues who come and evict people. 1,200 other property owners, or 1,199 other property owners, are going to go and riot and make sure that no one takes that property. So there are very good enforcement mechanisms for property rights that are not reliant on the courts. And so when we sit down in a mediation with the registered property owner and the current occupant, and we say to the registered property owner, yes, you got this right in law. Off you go. Go to the courts, get your eviction. We're not threatening you that you're going to do this. We're warning you that this is probably what's going to happen. So you can sit and negotiate an agreement with someone, or we can work with government to see if there's a way to sort this out. But getting an eviction order as a mechanism to resolve this dispute is not. So we think there could be better systems that are, both parties would have to agree to mediation and arbitration. We try and keep this out of the courts. It is going to be very, very messy, very messy. But that's what we've got. Any dispute, resolving any dispute is always going to be tricky. But I think if we can try and find alternatives aside from the court that are accessible and much more responsive, we can try to move ahead. We actually wanted to convene a session on dispute resolution. We thought it would be really interesting to bring in colleagues from all over the world, South America, Southeast Asia, Africa. This is not a unique problem that any country deals with. Just to see what is the best practice around a community-based mediated solutions, possibly, or even alternative courts. What has been done in other countries? I think it's a very, very interesting thing for us to look at.
And I just want to maybe touch on that, which I think is a great call, is that one of the best things that I think the solution can provide us now is at least a clear kind of way to view all of the disputes. So one, prevent third-party disputes. So someone buying the house a second time and causing like a second layer of disputes, which often we know which can happen. But also to put it there. And one thing I would just note is that kind of an experience that I've seen in like the past couple of years is that there definitely is, as Alana said, there's financing. There are people who are researching global land disputes. There are funds for this. We have found people who are, have funds to do title registration. But what we often find is, I think, there's a gap between the donors of what their vision is of the problem and what it is on the ground. So if you're saying, can we get like funds to do title registration or solve disputes, from that end, you would need to bring it all together. And generally, again, that whole backlog, just getting it to the point where it can be looked at. So, one thing I think would be great for the future is as people are putting on land disputes and cases, if the problem, for instance, is financing for the dispute, or to show someone that there is a need in this area to bring an independent arbitrator, as Alana said, the data could at least support that mission. So, I think we're at least the aspect now, I always think is best at least documented and have that view and be able to then, strike action, from the data.
Sean, do you see any of this? In terms, you're working with the commercial banks. You're working with the property sector in South Africa. Do you see that this example is something that could be mainstreamed and brought into other spheres of the property sector?
Yes, yeah. I think it has a lot of application in the whole property value chain. From construction management through to of moving parts, and like I said, that data feeding in for banks on their feasibilities, automated valuations, etc. So the whole value chain, stands to benefit. So it's great, and like online transactions, perhaps leasing as well, sales, and better management of portfolios, particularly residential portfolios, and better management of social low-income housing. So from a property management perspective, from managing tenants and leases, etc., through to the sort of asset management side of it, securing tenure. And like Ilana said, for large investors to come in, if you've got that security, you may see more lending, more perhaps funds looking to delve into this. So I think it could really benefit a lot of stakeholders, and the value chain is quite diverse, but the applications are from an individual house to a property fund managing a portfolio. I think there's room for application and then.
Yeah, no, that's cool. We're about to transition now into a conversation across the continent. So I don't want to get there just yet, but Daniel, maybe you can talk about one of the questions that came through on the chat was also about linking about mortgages and mortgage lenders. And I know that you've been having some conversations with the banks. Do you want to comment on that, Daniel? In South Africa, have you had any conversations with banks in South Africa?
Yes, a few. One, so I think on two ends, I think more banks, especially now, are trying to look at Africa like that to increase like their markets, enter new markets, new products. We've seen more interest, especially around prop tech from the different banks. Absa recently launched a green mortgage, product with Baldwin. So definitely new innovative products coming to the market. Very interesting conversation. It was a note I had with one of the major banks here around kind of low-income property, like kind of mortgages, was that they would rather bring in an unsecured lending product because they said people in this market don't want mortgages. And my response was that, well, if they never had titles before and didn't qualify, how do we know that they didn't want mortgages? It's a very, very tough way to say it. So I do think, that there's definitely, I think, interest. I would note that, say, Nedbank just launched a product called GapLend, which is a lending product, specifically unsecured lending for low-income communities. And so, but I find it interesting that they would rather launch a further kind of unsecured lending product rather than have it be. One thing we would love to see is that the cost of the title registration get bundled up with the mortgage. So if we get to the point and we say have it on the pre-registry system, Ilana can say with 99% certainty, this can get registered once the arrears are paid and we pay the conveyancing fees, that could be bundled in with the mortgage. What I see kind of, especially in South Africa where there's a larger lending market, I see kind of in the near future is that I do think, the banks are going to be quite interested in the project we're doing and what other people are doing, especially in backyard home rentals. And so there will be unsecured lending products first, and then they'll see that it's working and that there is a market and that people are willing to pay back. And then I think the unsecured lending will roll over into mortgages. And I was interested in what you guys think, but that would.
No, I think you're right, and I think it is Ilana mentioned incremental. I like incremental because it is the way that people start to become familiar with an idea and engage with it. And we are trying something. We're trying something new. We've come to the end of this section of the conversation, but as I said, it's a double bill, so don't go away. Neither my panelists nor the audience. But I would like to welcome onto the stage now Mr. Emmanuel Mungongo, Microsurveillance Directorate of Financial Stability at the Bank of Tanzania. If Emmanuel could come onto the stage, and then also Taufik Olatinwo, who's the head of business and process operations and ICT at the Nigeria Mortgage Refinance Company, which is a member of the AUHF. And if the two of you, Taufik and Emmanuel, please come onto the stage. This has been such a good discussion. And I do think we were quite keen as we were designing this agenda that we don't limit the discussion to South Africa, because in fact, the application is broad. And we've had some questions also on the chat about that. Someone from Zambia said we try this in Zambia. I've been seeing that there are efforts in Kenya and Rwanda and Ghana. I know that, Daniel, you're working in Ghana and in Nigeria. So I'm not the moderator of this session. Sean, you are. So I will hand over to you now and you can drive it. There's TK. Hello.
Hello. Kesia, how you doing?
Lovely to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Great, great. Sean, can I hand over to you and you take over?
Sure, yes. Thank you very much, Lisa. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Emmanuel. Yeah, so we touched on a lot of interesting points in the previous conversation, and now we're kind of going to the broader macros, optic and other technology products and innovations. So we did touch on a few things before, and this is sort of my interest, my focus. By way of introduction, I wasn't able to introduce myself, so I'm co-founder of the SA PropTech Foundation and the umbrella PropTech Africa Association, and I run my own consultancy, which is Diversity Property Solutions. So perhaps we can jump in with Emmanuel. And first question.
I think Emmanuel's not here.
So yes, we do. Sorry. Yeah, I thought someone welcomed Emmanuel. I thought the name was different. Yeah. So Taufik, sorry, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you very much, Sean. Yeah.
Great. So if you'd like to start us off, I think just as an opening sort of point, just wanted to ask, what do you think are the main barriers? So looking at affordable housing, so looking at the main barriers to affordable housing delivery and sustainable housing markets in African cities and other areas, and how do you think blockchain and wider PropTech applications could address these barriers? And sustainable markets mean those which are efficient and functioning, and there's security of tenure and growing finance funding markets, etc. So if you'd like to start us off, please.
Right, thank you very much, Sean. So my name is Taufik from Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Company. Can you all hear me? Okay. Right.
Yes.
Thank you. So it's great to be amongst these great people. It's afternoon here in Abuja. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are worldwide. So as we all know, Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Company is a secondary mortgage market. And that means we provide liquidity to the banks for them to be able to create more mortgages, thereby making housing to become affordable and providing more access to finance, broadening the base of mortgages we have in the country. And this is coming from the backdrop of not enough mortgages in the system, high cost of properties, and also the high cost of fund for individuals to be able to take mortgages to buy homes. Now, what are the main barriers to affordable housing? I'm going to start from the viewpoint of the supply side. It's well known that in Africa, and this is also Nigeria as well, that the number of titled properties we have less than 5%. So that means about 95 or above 95% of properties are not properly titled. And that means these are not bankable. So that's on the demand side. Now, if you look at the overall cost of actually constructing houses, there are so many people involved to the extent that, the cost of all the intermediaries, there's always an overlay from one person to the next, so many professions involved, so many developers, the agents, the banks, and the likes. Now, that has really increased the cost of being able to construct even the cheapest home that we can say we have, it would be affordable. And we know that the income level is also very low in Africa generally. So this is including Nigeria. Now, how do we bring technology to bear to be able to help us to reduce the affordability? And that's where I believe blockchain technology can help. Number one, it's the titling. For you to be able to acquire land, we can demonstrate very clearly that the registration process will be reduced. The cycle time will be reduced. It will be very transparent. And people will know exactly what they are buying and where the location is. And also, you don't have to fall into the trap of perhaps, a particular property being sold to more than one person. So, for example, if you buy a property and it's not titled, you don't even know where it's coming from, and you buy it, and the next day somebody appears and shows up and says, "Sorry, this is my property. The person that sold it to you, is the wrong person, or my cousin that traveled so long, for a long time now, and he just came back and sold the property." Now there's going to be a dispute, and I believe we discussed this briefly during the last, session. So, but blockchain will help to be able to determine the rightful owner. The transfer becomes transparent, and also the ownership becomes well known to everybody. So this is where, from the the supply side. From the demand side, the transfer. Once you take a mortgage, you transfer your property from, yourself to the bank that is providing the mortgage, and they send it back to you. Or you want to purchase the property, the transfer of ownership from one person to the next is very seamless, and blockchain makes it very transparent, because there's going to be only one record of it. It's not going to be like you making duplicates or you going to different registries. There's only one registry, there's only one document, and the transfer is well known by everybody, to see very clearly. I believe this is an area where we can reduce the affordability in terms of the overall cost of acquiring property, as well as providing access to finance once you have the title that is bankable. And these are the areas where we want, to really bring in the technology to help us, from the federal government level to the states to the local government to all the actors, all the way to the banks. I believe these are the key areas where we need to talk around and see how to move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Taufik. You make some really good points. So the previous session, obviously, we looked at a lot of the land title and obviously transfer, security and registration, of tenure and land title. So that's a really big area in its own, and it feeds into many of the stakeholders in the process. And you also mentioned construction. So I just made a brief comment in the previous session about the application of technology. And even, like the shared economy, there's some very interesting companies like, I forget the name now, iBuild, which is
iBuild, yeah.
So, that model is interesting in terms of funding construction. So sometimes there's other kind of sharing platforms with materials or skills that empower communities to build property, build those back rooms. So there's a lot of, place there to have real security of information, and tenure, is a part of that that can make things easy to manage, and investors in these products and services can have a bit more confidence and, reduce their risk, if everything is managed and clear and transparent. So construction is a big thing. Obviously, the funding side ties in a big way. But thank you very much as I think key points. Daniel, if you wanted to add anything to
that. Okay, yeah, sounds good. Hi, Taufik, TK, pleasure to see you.
Hey,
okay, and I totally agree. With what TK said, that really right now there needs to be. It's not 100% certain that property can't be resold twice. One thing I always think is quite interesting, that if you say look at Ghana, when you do a search at the title at the land registry, so the government's national land registry in Accra, there's a caveat that says that this is the official title from the government, but if it happens to be incorrect, we're not liable. So we have a situation where, even the government in this case is not taking liability if you get defrauded within your transaction. So I think, what I think TK said, which is really great, is that, there needs to be kind of both a push from the demand side and the supply side. So on the supply side, when you look at Nigeria, especially, as TK said, there's so many developers. There's a lot of people in the value chain. And there's also ones trying to look for advantages, how they can, make it easier to sell their property, how they can get that layer of trust. So, one thing I think that's very key is then, trying to build up kind of requirements potentially on the demand side that encourage developers and individuals to formalize their property, knowing that it'll increase their likelihood of getting, title, getting, access to financing or more sales. So I would say, even one thing we're doing right now in Nigeria is helping a Dubai-based developer invest in a large-scale affordable housing project in Nigeria. And one of the issues they've been looking for properties for years, is finding land banks and developers that want to do JVs with them. And knowing in Nigeria, there's many developers on the ground that are looking for partnerships, looking for funding. So one thing I think the blockchain in general PropTech can help with is, if there is a demand side, whether it's for investment, for development, whether it's for buyers from the diaspora or locally or local mortgage banks, can build up requirements to get access to this capital and encourage people to go and register themselves. And I think that's one thing we look at that's I think part of the reason why there's no developer, say, really, I think, especially in West Africa, that's the size of the large scale developers here in South Africa, the size of Growth Point, the size of Baldwin. And, a lot of access to this, large scale funding. So we can start building reputation-based systems, and giving people the pipeline to get that access. I think that'll go a long way. One thing I always think is unfortunate in Ghana and Nigeria is that if you have 20 years of experience building successful projects, selling them, having a reliable, a market and buyers, when you go to a bank to raise financing, you get pretty much are put in the same risk basket as someone who's never developed a project before, who maybe is a flight risk, going to Dubai after he sells a few off plan. So I really think what PropTech can start doing is building out these, trust-based, network and experience-based, systems. So as I accomplish, more, or as I get more properties registered, the demand side will then reward kind of, what's built, or so, or at least there's a pool from the supply and the demand, which, agree with TK on that end. That's kind of, I guess, my thought.
Yeah.
Point. Thank you, Daniel. And at point approaching funders and banks, etc., it's a difficult process. So anything that can assist with, recording that track record, making things more transparent, also the banks, I guess they that's their behavior and their criteria for a reason. It's difficult to assess risk, and especially, development is very risky, and especially on the affordable side. And you mentioned the big developers and funds, and we have seen activity from them engaging, like Calgary and 3 as well, in lower income development. So it's great to see that, because they have the the internal infrastructure, and then also perhaps it'd be good to see them supporting smaller developers. And also, when you mentioned approaching a bank, perhaps first time or entrepreneurs, etc., that they could also be assisted in a way, perhaps. I mean, that's also on the mentoring side. But if they start out on a solid platform that's transparent and that the banks are comfortable with, that's also a crucial thing. We need in this area, because there's this huge demand, and the supply side, we don't want it to be controlled by a few players. So that's another story, I suppose.
Exactly.
But thank
pipeline, yeah. The funnel for the pipeline. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, excellent point. Ilana, if you wanted to comment, perhaps add to that, or share some of your insights.
Yeah, really, I think it's just a comment on an interesting comment from Rosalie in the chat box, and just around mortgages and sort of, the social systems that exist. And of course, I mean, that's really critical. We've been operating in Khayelitsha for over 2 years now. And, I think, obviously what we're seeing is certainly a function of the particular place and time that we're in. But we haven't seen anyone coming in and saying, we want family title. I think the properties are very small. There isn't an extended history. People have been there sort of maybe 20 years, 25, 30 years. There isn't this, and I think a lot of areas, so to speak to South Africa, a lot of areas in cities in South Africa, there might not be this kind of, sort of family claim on a property. I did have one experience with someone who we facilitated accessing a mortgage and a FLIS to purchase a property out of a deceased estate. There was a surviving daughter that they purchased the property from. And once the purchaser had moved in, got the mortgage, got the subsidy, had a knock on the door from a relative to say, no, this is my house. And then it was just this very short conversation to say, it's not your house. Here's the title deed. So I think, I think it's okay to assert that in urban areas, this is the way the system works. And I think we've had lots and lots of discussions about this. For example, with wills, I hear from many people that, that poor people don't have wills, and we're just wasting our time. But I think, that's that S in the East model, that easy, attractive, social sort of, that acronym that I just showed briefly about the importance of social, and about the importance of asserting a desired behavior that might not necessarily align with everyone's own cultures and histories, but to say this is how things work in an urban area. If we do want to see a sort of participation by the private sector, this is how it needs to work. And it's fine, you don't have to work in the system. No one's going to force you to work in the system, but the system needs to be an accessible, affordable, secure system. And I think rather than asserting that in South Africa that people do things differently, so the commentary on that S and that social dimension is to always frame it in terms of, this is what property owners do. So instead of saying everyone uses informal systems, because all that does is reinforce the social acceptance of informal systems. So to start to say, actually, this is how property owners transact. Our responsibility is to make sure we have a safe, affordable, accessible system that people can use. So I think it is a really interesting debate, and the perspective that I personally have is that this is a critical pathway to wealth creation. It is an enormous enabler of growing cities. It is completely functional to economic development. May not lead to happy people. We don't know. We can't comment on that. But I think there's ample evidence that a formal system that works and that's accessible has a massive, massive impact on people's well-being and sort of material well-being, and I think we can assert that. But as I mentioned, the current system that we've got is neither accessible, it's not affordable, and it's not terribly safe. So I think that's a perspective that I would put on it.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a valid point. I mean, that wealth creation, distribution, and in terms of bringing people out of poverty, it is such a strong sort of impactful mechanism for that. And that's one of the things that we could unlock with such technology and systems. So as you say, and Rosalie's comments also, to come back to that, I agree, quite interesting. And in terms of the social setup, within families and communities. Hello?
Yeah.
Is everyone, sorry. Okay, so I thought it froze. So there's a lot of that, obviously, that can complicate things. But if you can put a system in place that then also the intergenerational, transfer, lends itself to this, because, like you say, there's times where if there wasn't a secure, clear title, people can be sort of, the assets can basically disappear, and without that security, that's not how it works. So. Yeah, thank you very much. That's such a valid point, and we've got a lot of work to do with our socio-economic challenges. So thank you for that. Next one, I wanted to come back to Taufik. So looking at your organization and Nmrc, so you've touched a bit on perhaps your blockchain strategy and land title as a barrier, but I wanted to just ask about Nmrc's relationships with state and federal governments, because that's also, we've mentioned it a bit, and it's a crucial point. And there's things, obviously, some points like the model mortgage and foreclosure law, and the electronic mortgage asset registry. So these things are obviously quite useful, but in terms of your strategy and then the experience with the state and federal entities, how has that been working, and the challenges, opportunities, and obviously how can blockchain be leveraged to bridge that gap, perhaps?
Right. Thank you so much, Sean. So this is actually where we've been doing quite a lot of work in the last. We understand that we are at the end of the value chain when it comes to the housing value chain. And if nothing happens at the initial stage, then we don't have a job. But that's not the intention. The intention for us is to be able to provide housing for the critical mass of the population. That's to broaden it and make sure that almost everybody has a home. So for us to do this, we realize that you cannot get a mortgage unless you have the proper title. And we all know that we have less than 5% of titled properties in Nigeria. So, and the people that are vested, in being able to provide titles, that's the government, particularly the state governments. And we've got 36 states plus the Federal Capital Territory, making 37 in Nigeria. Then the federal government making 38. And we have some spikes, like community, native lands, and things like that. But for us to be able to work effectively, so we started looking at, the aspect of the Mortgages and Foreclosure Law, which is riding on the back of the Land Use Act in Nigeria. And the Mortgages and Foreclosure Law essentially is to be able to create, a kind of level playing field for people to be able to come in and take mortgages, but also to help them to get the title of their properties very quickly from the state. So we'll put it in the law to say that, in the past, it would take you more than 2-3 months, if ever, to get title for your property. But the governors are now committed to say that once we pass the law through the State House of Assembly, it becomes something that should be done within 2 weeks, and it's even cheaper. And this is part of ease of doing business that they are committing to. Now, we've been able to establish these, and out of the 36 states, we've got 5 states that have passed the law. So we're not just, putting in place the law, we're also looking at the operational aspect of it. How do we operationalize this? And that's where we're trying to bring in the blockchain technology to help us. Even though we've got the title, how do we make sure that it's even transferable? Digitalization comes to play here. So I'm going to set an example of what we've done with one of the states. So we have a state called Kaduna State. They passed the Modern Mortgage and Foreclosure Law. Now we signed a tripartite with them. So that means the state, together with one of the primary mortgage lenders and Nmrc, are working together to be able to provide mortgages at affordable rates, blended rates, highly reduced rates, single digits to the residents of the state. But one of the key things for them to do would be the title. Of course, you cannot get a mortgage if you don't have a title, but because the state is committed and they're bringing money to the table, that means they want to see this done properly. And that means the properties they are bringing forward are titled properties. And that's one of the things they're doing. But we're now registering all of this into the blockchain environment to ensure that transfer becomes a lot easier. If you're able to use a property to take mortgage once, the property registered in blockchain, then it becomes transferable. It becomes bankable. It becomes like an asset that you can use to trade money, to always get money back. And because people are saying they're poor, but they have land. If they come to register the land through the state government, that means the land is transferable, that is bankable. They can use it to take mortgages, and they can use it to build homes easily. So you have something that you cannot really transfer. So that's why you say you don't have money. But if you can transfer it, you can translate it to, can make it asset backed, kind of, that you can get currency out of it. Then that's the spirit. Now, going back to the story, now we have this tripartite and we're working through, and now the state, the people of the state, the residents of the state are coming forward to take mortgages through the primary mortgage lender, and we're going to refinance from Nmrc. And that's an example of what we're doing. We're doing this together also with the World Bank in terms of the electronic mortgage asset registry, such that this becomes a kind of law that can be passed at the federal level and the state level. So we have the aspect of being able to, have a legal framework to support the blockchain technology that we're bringing to the table to make it operational. Now, we're not just talking to the states, we're also talking to the professionals. For example, we have the estate valuers that are going to do the valuation of the properties every time, so as to say, okay, your property is this amount of money this year. In the next 2 years, it has really, appreciated, and that means you are growing in wealth. That's one. Then we also have the lawyers that are doing the verification and validation of the property to say that, okay, we've seen this and we believe you are the true owner of this property, or this is the owner of the property in case you want to buy from the person. So we're bringing professionals to the table. They've been co-opted into this, and we're now bringing developers as well. So Family Homes Fund, which is the entity of the federal government of Nigeria, they're on board, and we have other private developers that they're beginning to, onboard their projects, their properties to sell to people through the blockchain environment. So this is like looking at the end-to-end value chain of housing in one place, and that's really the area where we would like to, to put more emphasis now. And we're not stopping at just the 5 states. We're going to the rest of the states, to all their governors, and we're working very, very closely with them.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's obviously interesting to hear. Obviously, a large organization, there's been a lot of interaction, and you're doing some fantastic work. So it's very interesting to get an insight, because that's obviously a crucial element of the puzzle. As Daniel said earlier, private companies are doing great work, and there is a place for private to do things, title and property information. But obviously in other areas, it's important for public sector NGOs to work together. So I think you both, Daniel and Lana, you both have very good experience, but perhaps Lana, you wanted to discuss on that, the working relationships, the support, the value in working with local and perhaps national governments in your very exciting projects.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have great expectations and vision for the city around their role in this. I'm not sure that it's shared, but we certainly see an enormous opportunity for the city to play a role as an authenticating entity, particularly in the subsidy property realm. So I think it's a peculiarity of the South African market that we have so many properties that were built by the state, and so in many cases the state still is the registered owner of those properties. It plays a very, very critical role, and I think what we're looking at in terms of looking at the way things work in sort of the property value chain as it's currently constructed, the city relies on validated data from the deeds office to populate its own systems that it then uses to govern. And kind of our experience and what we'd like to see is perhaps that the city doesn't wait for the deeds office to do that the city can actually start to, by authenticating and validating information itself, which it is the custodian of. Might be different departments, but the city does know that there is a property. The city built the house. So for the city to start playing that role, and if you think about, this is a permissioned solution. It's not a public blockchain with millions of nodes, miners. It's not that. It's you have specific entities that are authenticated and authorized to conduct specific transactions, and for us it feels like if we can get the city on board, then we've got a solution. Without the city, I think we've got something nice, but it just doesn't take us into that realm of really enabling urban development, real growth, bankability. So that's what we see. In terms of provincial and national, well, maybe I've just got a bad attitude to national government, but no, terribly important role for them at this stage. I mean, the policy space is kind of moving at a glacial pace. I mean, it's just, so to try and have a policy conversation, we can see there's some very obvious sort of policy shifts that really would materially affect the market. But I think we've all lost hope. So we really have lost hope that national government will move at the right pace to enable things. And so it's just, okay, we just need to work around this. We need to enable people to get on with their lives, not have to wait. Government will catch up.
Thank you very much. It's great to hear. about your experiences there. It can be frustrating at times because there's such a sort of there's like a dam that's just waiting to be broken down, and markets and individuals can benefit in so many ways. And it's interesting, perhaps on a local level you can get things done, and then provincial catches up, and then maybe national catches up. It's a good point you made.
Yeah, I think, look, the engine of growth is the cities. I mean, and the city has a material interest to do this. Remember, the value chain, the property value chain, it all ends up at revenue. That is top of mind for the city. They're currently delivering services to thousands and thousands of households who are not paying, and they're not paying because they're indigent. I mean, they have an indigent policy to enable people who are indigent to apply for rebates and a reduction in rates and so on. But there's just effectively no governance, and there's no governance because there's no visibility on property market transactions. The city doesn't know who's living where. The city doesn't know who owns what. It cannot govern. So I think the city has the most urgent incentive to participate in this. And for me, I think that hurdle, and it's so interesting to hear from Tawfiq, the hurdle really is about how do you step back from needing to build the system yourself? The IS&T department in the city of Cape Town, the Information Systems and Technology department of the city of Cape Town, can it sanction officials to use a platform that CESO has built for the Transaction Support Center? I mean, we can deal with the commercial concerns. No one should make a profit out of this. Of course, we know, we hate profits. So we can work around it. But the question really for officials is what would it take for an official to buy into a platform that they didn't build, but they're an authenticating entity on it? They have full visibility of what's going on the platform. How do we actually have that conversation? I think that's the interesting one.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I mean, it's a whole session on itself, obviously, the politics and policy of housing. It's fascinating. It's massively complex. And, it's perhaps the state has its hands tied in some ways, but it's such a crucial thing. And I mean, in South Africa, in the continent, there's such a need for housing. And then in South Africa, we've got our history obviously adds another dimension, and it just makes it even more urgent to help people to get title and secure tenure and help with that wealth distribution, and help the next generation to be in a different position and help them out of poverty and safe homes. And I mean, on the state side, I won't say too much, but I think there's a lot to be done in collaboration and also in skills development. I mean, I'm involved in various training initiatives and workshops, and they can be so beneficial, to share skills, transfer skills, to workshop, because like you said, some organizations or entities, if it's not their idea, they might not be comfortable, or perhaps their bosses won't be happy if they seem to just be taking somebody else's idea. But at the end of the day, it should be teamwork because it is such a complex system. So, that's something I'd like to see more of. But I always wanted to say welcome to Dr. Emmanuel Ngongo. Thank you for joining us. We had some technical issues. I'll come to you in a moment and explain the question to you. But Daniel, your comments, on your dealings and perhaps the attitude of state enterprises to your technology, etc., and perhaps how open are they to it, and what are the stumbling blocks?
Yeah, I think Alana put it in a good perspective on the South African side, and but I would just look in general and kind of like our work in Ghana and Nigeria as well. In Ghana and Nigeria, we have approximately 70 developers on the CESO platform. If anyone wants to check out the platform, the website is here, and around 10 law firms, several mortgage banks. And I think what's very key is what I'm seeing is that kind of hearing what TK is saying, which is really great, and Alana, is that I also always think it's very important to see that, especially in implementing tech, and then they say, innovating, the real estate sectors, that it's going to take multiple parts, and it's multi-dimensional. There's the government side, there's the private sector side. Again, as I mentioned before, CESO's real kind of value proposition is we offer property developers their own management system to go from Excel and paper, from their own team management system, onto a digital format. So a first step in kind of to digital as a more of a team management site. From there, we do some validation process before we list them on our marketplace. But for us, the key aspect is then working with the conveyancers who then take it in for registration. So we had a roundtable last year between several law firms in Lagos and the Lagos State Land Registry. And it was a great conversation between what could be done, what could not be done. So I also think what we need to do is kind of Lana touched on that, and PK said touched on that, is that there's definitely going to need to be different people who are making products to bring in all of the stakeholders. Because when we look at building a mortgage market, building a secure title registry, it's not just the government or the private sector. It's not the private sector is not one party. There's many different parties, and we need to make sure we're building the tools. So CESO, we like to think, plays on the private sector side, and then we want to then with the conveyancers, integrate. And so for us, we've had great feedback from, I guess, the government entities we spoke with, but more coming at an angle that we want to strengthen the conveyancing acts of the country. And I think one last thing I just wanted to mention is that we're also looking at, we also need to look at, how we can also, use technology to also bring this to other markets. We just recently, this past year, launched our first diaspora mortgage loan. So it allows people in the UK to take a mortgage from a UK bank to buy property in Nigeria. And we're going to be launching, we're in discussions with several US banks as well. So I also think, we also want to look at also how we can work, in other markets as well, kind of link up regulations between them, give them the tools where it's seamless, that people in one market, we look at diaspora investment to Africa is $45 billion a year, with around 30% estimated to go into real estate. So also looking at beyond our own regulations locally to integrate those with regulations abroad.
It's an excellent point. Thank you. A lot of interesting points. But at diaspora investment market, I've been following a number of companies, and it's such a powerful group because across the continent, diaspora groups in various countries, they generally maintain a strong emotional, financial connection to their home countries. I mean, I lived in London for 4 years. South African diaspora is quite large. Zimbabwean, Nigerian, Kenyan, all over the world. And it's quite interesting because you can get a healthy return on investing in real estate in your home country, and compared to low returns relatively in more developed markets. And then you're basically doing good by doing good. I quite like that. So I think that's another point, and that obviously technology has a clear role to play. So that's fascinating. And then the states, if they facilitate as well, that'd be great. So Dr. Mungongo, thank you for joining us. I'll ask you just to introduce yourself quickly, and then if you could share your thoughts on the question, which is basically we were looking at the strategy for technology and blockchain for entities, public and private, in different housing markets. And obviously, I think your role in your organization is obviously quite interesting. So basically, I wanted to understand your relationship with different states bodies, obviously being within that fold, if I'm not mistaken, and then with private sector, because we've said a few things and there's frustrations on both sides, I'm sure, in terms of housing and all the many facets that it has. So I'm sure the state can be frustrated with private sector sometimes, and vice versa. And there's somewhat of a disconnect, which where training, education, sort of joined up, brainstorming and working meetings, etc., can play a big role. But I just wanted to understand your experience with technology and also generally working with state and private sector.
Thank you very much. Sorry for joining the meeting late. It was out because of technology challenge, but as introduced, my name is Emmanuel. I work for Bank of Tanzania, and I've been involved in housing finance from credit market perspective, but I've also done some work in the area of digital credit. This is not limited to housing finance, but as a central bank, our role is both regulatory and development. the central bank has got some schemes to support in housing finance in the country, but we are also supporting innovation in terms of technology to support the financial inclusion. Now, in terms of the potential of technology, for here in Tanzania, the area of blockchain is a bit new. We are still contemplating about it. Even in our national financial inclusion framework, there is a component about our policy being open to tap into new technology like blockchain. But so far, or at the national level, there is no explicit policy or initiative to accommodate the blockchain. But our national financial inclusion framework is open to adopt the new technologies, including blockchain. For Tanzania, what we have been experimenting is mainly mobile money. For remittance, for processing microloans, and we see some opportunities around these kind of innovations in terms of mobile digital finance providers collaborating with banks or housing finance institution to come up with a product to offer finance, particularly across the housing development value chain. Because particularly, and this technology has a lot of potential to low-income household, because for them, the conventional banking has got the low-income household do not have access to conventional banking. So we see the potential. The challenge here is how do we, credit providers or housing finance providers accommodate this technology in terms of designing appropriate products. Another development which I think related with technology is the lesson which we are now picking from these energy, solar energy providers. They use a kind of lease financing arrangement whereby the household is connected with the solar panel and they make payments in small installments. And given the connectivity, that there is a central place where the solar solution is accessible. So this connectivity of machine is offering opportunity for a housing finance provider to leverage the connectivity of solar equipment to a house with considering new financing, house financing solutions. For example, if there is expansion of the house, since there is a data generated by this connectivity, there's a room now for leveraging the connectivity plus digitization of payment. So these are my few observations about the potential of technology to enhance housing finance in Tanzania. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. It's fantastic to hear the initiatives happening in Tanzania. And obviously, the state, and particularly in finance, can be such an enabler, obviously, because the dynamics and the functioning is different to a private lender. And it's great to hear, there's housing with like the solar additions to homes, and that those can be financed, because that's also with backroom rentals in South Africa. There's micro lenders basically that help people build those back rooms, and the state can play quite a role in that. It's a lot, income generation, wealth distribution. It's quite exciting. And then the solar, saves people long-term costs and people money in people's pockets. And they wouldn't be able to do that obviously without the assistance. So that's really, really exciting to hear. So thank you for sharing those insights. So we've got about 10 minutes. So I had two questions around different parts of the value chain. So taking a step back, we mentioned construction earlier. So the role of blockchain and technology in addressing, challenges and inefficiencies in that. And then also on the other end of the value chain is property management. So you're welcome to touch on both of those or one of them. I think maybe we start with Ilana in your experience, or if you have some high-level comments on, that's a more, I guess, another element of the value chain and important. So perhaps if you share.
Oh, great. I just wanted to pick up the point that Dr. Ngongo was making about shifting out of cash and into digital payments, and it really is a game changer, and it will happen right across the value chain. So we're a bit of South Africa is really way behind. I mean, we're watching the data out of Rwanda, doing some work there. With regulators watching sort of mobile payments really pick up, and I'm not sure whether you're seeing the same thing in Tanzania. We're hoping that you are, but it does open up enormous opportunities to get finance into the sector, and it's all about it's all about visibility. So we don't need salary slips. We don't need to just bank salaried people, because if you're watching the digital payments coming into a small business, the small business owner can go and get a mortgage off the back of those digital payments, and that's what we're seeing some of that happening. And what's really interesting, again, from a product design perspective, is that you have a mortgage with the potential for daily repayment, set at a percentage of the takings of the business. So that is a real game changer. I think it's very, very exciting, and likewise, for the small-scale developers and providers right through the value chain. And I think iBuild is a wonderful example of a platform that can do that. I think beyond that, just the whole issue of sort of enabling people to build credentials and then participate. And I think iBuild's got that. It's the same as Uber. You kind of rate people. You've got that credential building, but beyond that, moving into something where there's more of a sovereign model. So if you've got, if you've got an ID, you've got a digital ID, to sort of enable business owners to sort of bring their own data into a platform. I mean, I'm sure you've seen what's happening in India with something called DigiLocker. So the state can provide data into that DigiLocker. The private sector provides data into that, and basically what you've got is a very solid set of credentials that the financial sector can use. So I think this is really, really exciting stuff. And, Daniel, in our conversations around what we're doing in Khayelitsha, and then also starting to work with small business owners, and kind of saying to Daniel, what you've built for us in the housing sector, it's not a far leap to go to building something that enables something very similar for a small business owner. They've also got documents that they need to store. And, if we can sort of access information out of private sector providers who are working with those, whether it's suppliers, whether it's payment providers and so on, to just bring that data into a completely secure environment, you're on a whole different level now. So I think this is very, very exciting, and enables, it's alternative data, it's new forms of lending. It opens the market up completely. It really, really does. So I think what you're describing in Tanzania is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on that as well. And I think it's a great point. I think an example of the solar and what Ilana is talking about, I also think it's very important to look at, what services can be provided, say, pre-title. So we also look at, saying in Khayelitsha, as Ilana was saying, even in the informal settlement, there was still, a sale. And so before people can maybe even get into the mortgage market, there's opportunities to look at, once, we verify who is living in the place and what services can be provided to build up the credit scores. One thing, I always think, interesting, as anyone who's been to South Africa would see that, if you look at most informal settlements around Africa, most of them still have, DSTV or MTN dishes. So many of these companies, private sector companies, are building out verification-based systems, and they're building, alternative credit scoring systems. So, I think it's going to be very important in this example of, like, say an energy loan, even if the requirement is not yet title, it's occupancy or beneficiary, and we can start adding these tools in. to kind of pre-transaction to build up the data score, build up the credit, I think can go a long way. And then that could feed into mortgage origination and that end. And maybe TK or anyone may touch on that, where this kind of pre-data could then enter into the housing market.
Yeah. If I could add something on that, I think another issue here is whether there could be a partnership between housing finance providers and the other digital financial service providers. For example, the mobile, the telcos, and other related companies. Because, for example, here in Tanzania, we are also experimenting supplying water using digitize the water dispensers. So you have information about water usage. You can link it with information about the solar energy usage, and if the model can also gather information about the household, if it's doing agriculture, if there's a cottage carpentry. So additional information can allow credit not only focus on housing, but also focusing on livelihood, focusing on income of this household, which also enable it to repay the loan. So balancing both the demand for housing finance and the livelihood activities, whether it's a small garden around the house or it's a cottage, small industry. So it's about gathering the data in that household economy, which will now enable to make housing finance more viable. That's what
absolutely. I agree.
Excellent, thank you, Alex.
Yeah, can I make a quick remark? I have like 1 minute.
Probably be the last.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I think the way I see blockchain assisting the management of housing, and I'm a bit futuristic here, is to get to the point where we have all the key players, as actors on the blockchain, the housing, the assets itself, and we have what is called the asset-backed token. So the asset-backed will be the real estate, the properties, and we cannot transact them as if they're just real commodity or like cryptocurrency-backed assets. And this is the stage where I believe we should get into in the next, I would say, 5 to 10 years. That way, we'll see more of the properties being registered properly. We'll see people willing to really come in to ensure that their properties are bankable, and we can trade off all these properties and do transfer of ownership very easily on blockchain. This is the kind of environment that blockchain will allow us to do very well. We talked about the supply side and the demand side. They all become part of the equation, and there won't be any, what I would say, a barrier between the two oceans. So there'll be like interflow of information, transfer of, and the very swift communication between all of the parties. And I think that's where we should be going towards. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Taufik. I think that brings us to the end of our session, so we don't run over. I've thoroughly enjoyed the discussion. I hope everyone who's been watching has done so. And thank you to those who's shared their comments and their questions. I'm sure if there's anything else, we could perhaps be, remain contactable. So you can obviously reach out to the organizers. But I just wanted to say thank you to our fantastic panelists. I think it's been, like I said, I've really enjoyed it, and it's been an honor to Daniel, Taufik, and Emmanuel for sharing your time and your knowledge.
Thank you all. Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you all. Thanks, guys.
And thanks you, Sean, for moderating and bringing everybody together and managing the conversation. There have been such interesting comments also on the chat, and I do think that this conversation will go on further. it was fascinating, and of course it extends not just it starts with the house and the person living in that house, and then it extends into all forms of economic activity, and that was just really great to say. Lovely discussion. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
We
you.
do have, I just want to note, we have a prop
Thank you.
tech masterclass on Friday, that Roland Igbinoba is going to be leading. So take a look at the agenda and visit that. And then if anybody needs to get in touch with anybody else and doesn't know how, you know how to find me, and I'll help direct you through. Thank you very much for all of that. We now have a break. Do we have a break? We do have a break. We have a break until 3 o'clock. And at 3 o'clock, we have a really exciting two sets of panels. On the one side, we have a panel with Habitat for Humanity and their Terwilliger Center for Innovation and Shelter. And it's a panel looking at innovations and investments in green housing. And then on the other side, we have a shark room where we've invited three developers initiatives to pitch a proposal for investment, and that will be evaluated by a panel of investors. So it will start with the pitch presentations from the three, and then the judging and the engagement. It should be a good, fun session. So I hope to see everybody there. Thank you very much, and all the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.